Israel is a redeemed people. God has saved them from the bondage in Egypt, and as slaves, lives was very difficult. They have no freedom. They were under great bondage. But God in His mercy heard their cry and delivered them so that they receive of the Lord freedom from slavery, and God also gave to them the gift of Canaan so that they were no longer slaves, but they became land owners. They had their own field by which they could plant their crops, and in so doing, there was stability in their lives. They had enough for themselves because the Lord sent the rain, gave them the fertile ground, so that they would have peace to raise their family from one generation to another generation. So Israel was indeed a very privileged people. And this scene in the book of Deuteronomy is written before Israel entered the promised land. And they have not entered, but what will life be like when they would enter the promised land? You remember when they were in the wilderness, they ate manna daily. God provided the manna for them from heaven, and we call it angels' food. Angels' food. God provided this angels' food for them so that they would be fed and they would be nourished as they prepare themselves to become stewards for God in the land that God would give to them, so that Israel can be a nation for God. Israel can be a nation whereby they could be a witness to all the nations of the world for the care of the living and true God in their lives, in the lives of their families, in the life of the nation. And so there are certain responsibilities that God would teach them that they are to do when they enter the promised land. And Deuteronomy 24 spelled out for us some of these, and we are going to go through, in particular, debts, pledges, debts, and repayment. That's the title of our exhortation. And O.T. Spence, he said well, he said here, we have acknowledged in these two passages of this chapter not only the limit to which a creditor might go in keeping the pledge, but also in the spirit in which that pledge must be taken from the borrower. In other words, when they enter the land, each of the families of the tribes would be allotted their portion of the inheritance. But should there be situations whereby families would, face poverty, what could be the reasons why a family who has land, who has all that they needed to put enough food on the table, to be in such a state? Well, perhaps because of sickness, because there are those who were not prudent and they gambled away what they have, and there are those who are swindled maybe. So they are in a state of need, and they had to borrow to keep themselves afloat or to keep their families afloat. And so what are the duties of the borrower is being taught here in our text. Here we are told that no creditor was to take a person's upper or lower millstone. This upper and lower millstone describes his occupational tool, or describes his livelihood skill. Okay, these are the things that enable him to work in order to repay his debts. And so if the borrower were to take away the upper and lower netterstones as is described in page 6, verse 6, then they would lose that ability to repay. And so they would not be able to have enough to pay off their debt, and they would be in trouble. And so the borrower has certain responsibility, the lender has certain responsibility towards the borrower. And when the lender comes to collect his debt, here we are told that he is to do so with a spirit of courtesy and grace. He is not to force himself into the man's house, but he is to make his request when he comes standing abroad. So what is this standing abroad? You know, we see that there are those who owe money, and their debtors very nasty towards their borrower. Right? There are those who exact upon their borrower, so that the borrower would suffer. And here it is taught to them that they are to have a spirit, a gentleman spirit towards their debtors. Verse 10 and 11 of our text says, "When thou dost lend thy brother anything, thou shalt not go into his house to fetch his pledge." Right? His house is his private place. That's where he has his peace, isn't it? So, thou shalt stand abroad, and the man to whom thou dost lend shall bring out the pledge abroad unto thee. So, he would allow him so that he would be able to do so by bringing the pledge to him. So this is what we call the spirit of the collection of debt or collateral that is taught in verse 10 and 11. So that in Israel, there is a spirit of peace in the society. All manner of oppression, covetousness, or manner of oppression, covetousness, the Lord abhors. And so the Lord seeks that His people would adhere by this rules of courtesy towards their lender. And the Spirit also is also demonstrated in that the creditor was never to keep a collateral that is necessary for the necessary comfort of the borrower, such as his blanket, what he used to cover himself in the night. He will be very cold if you take away his blanket, isn't it? Verse 12 and 13. And if the man be poor, thou shalt not sleep with his pledge. In any case, thou shalt deliver him the pledge again when the sun goeth down, that he may sleep in his own raiment. So if he, whatever he pledged, there are certain things that there are certain basic comfort that you need to accord to him, and that he may sleep in his own raiment and bless thee, and it shall be righteousness unto thee before the Lord thy God. So you see that their actions, their righteous actions, God will see and God will bless. And you see that that's quite a different society, isn't it? The people are taught how to be gentle, how to love one another, how to take care of one another. And in that sense, it is also to take care of themselves, isn't it? Who knows, right? One day, you may be the person that needs help, and you would be very happy, isn't it, if the other person would respond in the same gentleman's spirit. This expressed the second area of items that the collector was not to actually take from the borrower, but could be held, whether on paper contract as a collateral. He was not to take his millstone, that's what we mentioned, the occupational tool, or his blanket, his reposing bed. These two areas, if the man was to be able to work out the debt, payment of the debt, so that would enable him to repay his debt. And the widow was to be especially respected in her debts. The raiment of the stranger, fatherless and widow was to be respected. Verse 17 to 22. Thou shalt not pervert the judgment of the stranger, nor of the fatherless, nor take a widow's raiment to pledge. But thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing, when thou cuttest down thy harvest in thy field, and hast forgot a sheaf in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thy hands, when thou beatest thine olive tree, when thou goest not, thou not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow. In other words, when they would collect their harvest, just collect once through. Do not pick until everything is clean. Leave something behind so that the widows, the fatherless, the strangers is able to pick them up. Right? That's a merciful act. Right? A merciful act. And so the Lord is a merciful God. Right? Remember we were mentioning about the word mercy. The word mercy is the word that means goodness and kindness. It's a character of God. And when we have God, the Spirit of God with us, we learn, or God gives us to understand kindness and goodness. Whereas in the world, you have evil and wickedness, isn't it? But it's quite different. The Lord teaches His people, when thou gatherest the grapes of thy vine, thou shalt not glean it afterwards. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, for the widow. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. Israel remains the creditor that he was once in Egyptian bondage, or at least his forefather was, and therefore should remember the pity and sympathy that is needed for those who are in other bondages. Most careful and honorable judgment was requested for the widow. O.T. Spence. And then in verse 7, you see the situation of a theft. The text says, if a man be found stealing any of his brethren, of the children of Israel, and maketh merchandise of him, or selleth him, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put away evil from among you. In America today, they have a sign, you cannot steal above $950. So you can go into a shop and you can take things, but take below that amount. Wow. That's the new law in certain states today. How sad it is that there is a reversal towards of the values of the Reformation, the hidden values come and overtake the world once again. And if the people of God are still not awakened to the dire situation, well, what must we do? Well, I say that one soul at a time, as God leads us, we go and sow the good seed of the gospel in the hearts of people, that the Spirit of God may use it to cause a change, so that there would be a turnaround by the mercy of God. There is a difference in the Bible between a servant and being in slavery. Even in the initial prophecy concerning Ham and Canaan, it was said he would be a servant of servants, which would place his service in a superlative manner. To be servant of servants means a high degree of service. God forbids slavery, but makes provision for the servant. So here you see the Lord ensures that the society doesn't degenerate into chaos. What we say, anarchy, looting. Looting means that you just go into a shop and take anything you want. There's no more law and order in the society. The system breaks down, the order breaks down. But here in God's society, on God's law, for men, that's for men, It's for us. It's for all the nations to implement it. Right? And how serious it is to deal with the thief. Verse 8 and 9. Leprosy is causes and cleansing. Take heed in the plague of leprosy, that thou observe diligently and do to all that the priests, the Levites, should teach you as I commanded them, so ye shall observe to do. Remember what the Lord thy God did unto Miriam by the way, after that ye were come forth out of Egypt. Reconfirmation of the precious act of cleansing from leprosy. Here in Leviticus 13 and 14 is described to us, which we have covered in our earlier studies, what a person is to do when he discover that perhaps he may have leprosy. He has to go to the priest at certain time for identification if he truly was plagued with leprosy, and then he would have to isolate himself. If he's not sure, that he's isolate himself for a period of 7 days, 14 days, and then he's to check again. So very much like what happened during the pandemic, isn't it? 7 days, 14 days of quarantine. Miriam is presented again here. She was plagued with leprosy for her insubordination towards Moses, and Israel is urged to remember that such a spirit would reproduce the disease again. Right? Here, God plagued Miriam. Miriam was the sister of Moses, but when he turned against him, the Lord had to stop her, because by reason of their closeness, they thought they had that audacity to do such things, and that you see that the punishment was very grave, very grave. Verse 14 to 15, the oppression of servants. Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon him, for he is poor and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. All kinds of servants are included here, whether they are in Israel or foreigners. Oppression is forbidden, and payment is to be rendered daily in order that the servant would meet his urgent need. So, for a servant, a slave, they may not have enough for their daily sustenance. And so if you were to withhold their salary, accrue them for weeks, then you realize that they will not have enough to make ends meet. And so here is the daily courtesy is suggested to keep the poor servant from being oppressed by the delay of the wage. And that is how grave his poverty is. And it is alluded here that God especially hears the cry of the poor. James 5 verse 1 to 6. Go to now, ye rich, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have ripped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them that have ripped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. Ye have lived in pleasure on the earth, and been wanton. Ye have nourished your hearts as in the day of slaughter. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. Verse 16, individual responsibility. The individual shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. Here, you see that Israel, although later sought to blame God for the sins of their forefathers, yet in their early history, God assures them that God would not hold the children responsibility for the sins of their parents. This included both the spiritual judgment for the sin as well as the physical punishment for that sin. So the father is to be punished for his own sin, and his children should not bear the sin of their father. Verse 18. remembering Egypt. But thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee thence. Therefore I command thee to do this thing. This great singular blessing in the Old Testament is according to my doings when I brought you out of the land of Egypt, the Lord says. Over 200 times this phrase or its equivalent is given in the Old Testament. The Exodus and Egypt include so very many outstanding things that God did for his people. Egypt and the Exodus marked the miracle of judgment visited against the Egyptians in death, the miracle in crossing by the blood-stained doorway, remember the Passover lamb, the miracle of leadership in the pillar of cloud and fire, God led them, a miracle of condescension in dwelling among Israel in God's tabernacle, and the miracle of faithfulness in the great covenant of God towards Israel. God was very merciful, and God led Israel. They were a most privileged people, and before they entered the promised land, God would give them all these instructions so that when they enter the promised land, they would know how to behave themselves, what to act, what to do. Oftentimes we have this question that is asked to us, that what is God's will? What is God's will? What should I do? Well, as you study the Word of God, you will find that He teaches us going into details what we should do in our daily lives. Here are very good examples that are given, and it covers every aspect of life. So we thank God for His grace in enabling us once again to take time to meditate upon His Word. Amen.